To call Fanforstic a disappointment would be an understatement. This movie is garbage in the worst way possible, which I'll get into in our post-rewrite analysis. But to get there, we must explore the actual rewrite. So let's set the stage. I'm gonna keep the cast and budget intact for this. I don't think either were the reason for this film's failure. As is often the case, this movie suffered from studio interference. But I think I have a solution to that in my script. Let's find out. We open with an explosion. We're at the Baxter Building, home of the Baxter Foundation. Attempt number 462 has just failed. The teleportation device sent its occupant to the negative zone as planned, but the pod promptly destabilized and was unable to return. We meet the scientists behind the attempt. Franklin Storm, renowned scientist, is the senior head of the Dimensional Warp program. His adopted daughter Sue is the lead of the junior division associated with the program, which means she oversees the less seasoned staff. And FYI, she and the other cast members outside of Franklin are being aged up in this script from teenagers to post-grads, which will jump them from 18-ish to their mid-ish 20s. Sue accompanies Franklin as he goes to interview a promising new recruit for the think tank's junior division. And what do you know, it's Reed Richards. We learn that Reed has already come quite close to solving interdimensional travel on his own, by teleporting something from this realm to another, although he doesn't know where he's sending things or have a way to bring them back. Sue worries that Reed will usurp her as team lead, but reluctantly agrees to let him on the team. Reed insists that he and his friend/assistant, Ben Grimm, are a package deal, to the point where he's willing to walk away if Ben isn't participating. He advocates for Ben as a mechanical engineer with a breadth of experience at his scrapyard. Both are allowed in, and the project continues. We meet Johnny Storm, Sue's adoptive brother and Franklin's biological son. And this version of Johnny is a finance bro/venture capitalist type. He's less interested in the science behind the warp program and more interested in the fame and money associated with the success it'll bring him. We also meet someone else interested in fame, Victor Van Dam, Sue's second in command. And after everyone is introduced, we get a montage that outlines each of the characters and their relationships. Despite being the junior lead and showing her competency repeatedly via hard work and long nights, Sue is treated coldly by her subordinates, who think she only has her position due to nepotism. By contrast, Victor puts in less work but is so charismatic and gifted that he's practically worshipped by the junior scientists, and is a darling of the senior ones. Ben is shown to have haphophobia, or a fear of being touched, but he's also prickly enough that he's willing to stand up for Reed when juniors try to prank or bully him. Ben also becomes fast friends with Johnny despite being an introvert to Johnny's extrovert, as Ben is willing to go tit for tat with the finance bro without taking offense. While Johnny likes Ben, he's shown to despise Victor's smug attitude. He's also shown to be jealous of Sue, especially considering the fact that she's closer to and more similar to their dad, although Johnny masks his insecurity with humor. Reed, on the other hand, has no insecurities, which is both a blessing and a curse because he's maybe a little too happy-go-lucky and a little too gullible. But his good heart and earnest respect earns him Sue's attention, while also earning Victor's resentment as Van Dam watches the two grow closer. We close out this character-focused section with the completion of the dimensional portal machine thingy. Franklin states that the next step is to include NASA and put trained men out into the unknown. But Johnny gathers the cast after the announcement to pitch his own idea. He wants to go through the portal first so they can have their names out there and on the project forever, as a way of branding. Our heroes agree, but more for the sake of exploration than money. And together, all five make the jump. The negative zone is different. Unlike the movie where it was just Arizona but darker, I imagine it to be a place covered in plant life and full of strange alien creatures. Like a world rife with abundance. Our heroes arrive at the edge of a cliff, with some of their pods half hanging off. In a panic, Reed tries to teleport everyone back. Victor realizes something is wrong and leaps from his pod to safety. Johnny's pod ignites, while Ben's is pierced by rocks from the cliff, which seems to be alive. Sue half exits her pod, but suddenly a massive draconic monster emerges from the rock, causing an explosion of energy. Sue awakens later. Victor has dragged her, Reed, and Johnny from the cliff's edge, which now features shattered machinery that's being swallowed by living rock. Before Sue can properly process what she's seeing, she realizes that she can only half see herself. Also, despite his clothes being scorched and his body smoking, Johnny is completely fine, and Reed is stretched out.
What did he say?
And they're under attack. Bug-human creatures with laser guns ambush our heroes, chanting the same phrase endlessly.
Anna Nihil. Anna Nihil. Anna Nihil.
The team uses their powers to survive. Victor steals a laser gun and turns it against their foes. Johnny instinctively sets his hands on fire, managing to pelt his enemies with small bolts. Sue uses her invisibility to get the upper hand, but falters when she can't maintain it. Reed, after getting cornered, reflexively cries out, "Ben!" At that moment, Ben Grimm emerges from the cliffside in his stone body to defend Reed and the others. He turns the tide, saving the day as the Bugmen retreat. In the aftermath, our heroes regroup and take shelter in a cave. They proceed to review their powers. Johnny is excited for the possibilities his ability has unlocked, despite not being able to ignite any body part except his hands. He's also already thinking of a catchphrase. Reed is curious about his abilities and has trouble stretching single limbs instead of his entire body. Sue randomly shifts in and out of the visible spectrum, with only a minor ability to create barriers that she accidentally discovers after tripping over a root. And Ben, in a change from the comics, is ecstatic. His fear of being touched is partially alleviated by his new rocky body, although at this point he still maintains his no contact rule. Victor gets nothing, and pretends that he's not bothered by it. Our gang makes a game plan. They need to return home. One of the pods, Victor's to be specific, was flung from the explosion and crashed a distance away. The group hopes to send someone back via the intact-ish pod, so that said person can initiate a rescue mission. But first, they must reach the crash site. So, our heroes trek toward it. On the way, Sue confides in Reed that she's scared of these new powers and what they might mean for her and Johnny. While Reed reassures her in a clumsy yet earnest way, Victor chastises Sue for not seizing the opportunity her new powers present. The team encounter another band of bugs, this time feasting on fauna in a set of ruins. Reed advises caution, but Victor goads Johnny into triggering a fight. The five face the bugs, who chant the same phrase as earlier, but are interrupted when the arrival of the massive beast dragon from the cliff forces them to scatter and flee. Reed and Victor end up together, with Sue, Johnny, and Ben forming a second group. Despite our two parties traveling in the same direction, Reed and Victor reach the pod first. While Reed wants to wait for the others, Victor insists on fixing it with their expertise alone, simultaneously volunteering to be the one who goes back. He then asks why Reed would want to rely on others, so Reed explains that he would have never gotten as far as he did without help, especially from his best friend, Ben. Meanwhile, the second group has been slowed by taking a longer route. While doing so, Sue rags on Johnny for being reckless. The two argue about what to do with their powers and how to handle this new reality, with the tension of their family dynamic eventually spilling into light. Back to Reed and Victor, who have been working on the pod for hours now. Victor begrudgingly acknowledges that Reed's intellect is great, at least equal to Sue's, but at best second to his. When Reed ponders what the bugs were chanting, Victor recalls a story from his childhood. He mentions that his people know magic, and that some of them could scry into other realms, and how at one point they saw something, whether a vision of the future or a glimpse across dimensions. An idea of an entity that would one day come forth to conquer their world. When Reed asks what the monster's name was, Victor mentions his people called it Nihil. So Reed asks what that means, and Victor simply answers,
Doom.
Back to Sue, Johnny, and Ben. They're resting. Sue and Johnny aren't speaking, so Ben finally intervenes. He tells the siblings that their father's love isn't finite, and that both of them are worthy of both it and one another. He compares their relationship to his relationship with Reed, saying that they're not mirrors, they're complements, and that their differences are what's going to take them far. Reed and Victor finish their preparations. Reed still wants to wait for the others, specifically Sue, so she can check the specifications of the proposed dimensional jump. But Victor is so certain of his calculations that he initiates takeoff anyway. And surprise, surprise, the pod malfunctions. Victor is transported home, but the pod destabilizes and combusts, burning parts of his body and mainly his face. Meanwhile, in the negative zone, the botched transport has ripped a hole in space-time, distorting the physics in the immediate area and throwing gravity out of whack. Bugs besiege the new portal, facing off against Reed as he takes cover. Johnny, Sue, and Ben arrive to lend a hand, but as they do, the dragon returns. The four make a stand against their extra-dimensional foes. Ben goes toe-to-toe with the dragon, while the rest face the Bugmen and try to close the portal. As gravity shifts, Johnny and Sue get separated. Johnny panics, but his sister walks him through controlling his powers, giving him enough encouragement to think outside the box. And in Zero G, Johnny finally chooses his catchphrase.
Flame on!
He then manages to shoot fire from his hands and feet, pulling off a haphazard form of flight and using it to rescue his sister from one of the dragon's attacks. Reed deduces that Sue's powers are what can close the portal, although she's gonna have to do it from the inside. Ben volunteers to hold the line, but Reed refuses to leave his friend, coming up with an idea instead. The group defend the portal for as long as they can, retreating until it's just Sue and Reed, with Johnny spewing fire through the portal to defend them from Dragon and Bugman alike. Then Reed stretches through the rift to hold Ben's hand, wrapping his arm around Sue, and on his mark, Ben yanks them both through the portal just as Sue seals it. On the other side, Ben decides that holding Reed's hand wasn't too bad, and agrees to a handshake that lasts an awkwardly long time. Franklin Storm chastises his children for their stupidity, but holds them tight and proclaims his love for them anyway. Sue and Johnny rejoice, with both praising the other for their accomplishments. The group sees Victor off as he's sent to the hospital for medical attention. And as they regain their bearings, Franklin comments that much will change for them, whether they like it or not. Because they're no longer just scientists, or even humans, really. No, they're something different, something greater. They're the... Hey now, that wasn't too bad, was it? Really what I wanted to do with this script was focus on what I think is missing from the comics. At least for me as a very casual consumer of the Fantastic Four mythos. My main problem with the team is that it often feels less like a group of four and more like a group of 1 plus 3. And that one is obviously Reed Richards. He's the most interesting on the team, and I feel like big events seem to focus on him and never on the others. So I wanted to do something a little different and give the other members time to shine. That's why there was such a focus on Johnny and Sue's relationship, and stark changes to Ben Grimm. On the other hand, an area I think is closer to the comics is the plot of this script. To me, the Fantastic Four are superheroes second and explorers first. They're always getting into weird stuff off-world and meeting aliens and sleeping with aliens and stuff. So I wanted this movie, in contrast to the ones from the 2000s, to highlight that aspect in a way that was fun and digestible for new audience members. That, I think, is explicitly something that would go over with the studio much better than what Josh Trank originally intended. Because the movie we originally got is very clearly not his. But it's not the studio's either. It's a chimera composed of two conflicting visions that ultimately muddies both. On the one hand, you have your standard superhero fare with a final fight that involves a blue light shooting into the sky. And on the other, you have this body horror, science-y, grungy flick. Those are hard to mix when you're trying, and when you're not, well, you saw how it went. I honestly think either version in their purest form would be better than the end result, but that's something we'll never see. Maybe in another dimension, am I right? The Fantastic Four are a group that, to me, are flexible. I like aspects of both the original, which is more of a lighthearted family, and the angstier, younger, more dysfunctional Ultimate version. This 2015 rendition obviously took far more inspiration from the latter, as was the vibe for Marvel movies of this era. So in that vein, I wanted to portray a younger, less experienced team. You'll notice that none of them really reached their full potential here. That was intentional. I like the idea of saving Full Flame Johnny for a sequel, and showing an expansion of Sue's powers, explosion in Ben's strength, and a wacky creativity to Reed's stretching. Aspects like that can build hype for the next movie and help this one stand out. Speaking of sequels, let me outline the rest of this series. I actually think the next movie wouldn't be Fantastic Four 2, but would instead be a spin-off, for yours truly, Victor Van Dam, whose name I changed to the Ultimate version because, come on. The spin-off would feature Victor returning to Latveria and his people, then follow him as he learns magic and remodels himself into the Doctor Doom we know and love, while simultaneously conquering his country. After that, we can get into Fantastic Four 2, with Victor as the main villain. Then for the third movie, I'd actually do something a little different and go with Annihilus. For those out of the loop, Annihilus is the ruler of the Negative Zone, which is the dimension our party traveled to in this movie. He commands an almost endless legion of insectoid creatures and ships known as the Annihilation Wave, and thus is one of the most dangerous rulers in the Marvel Universe. I know a lot of Fantastic Four media centers around Galactus, but that's precisely why I'm choosing someone different. You can see Galactus literally anywhere else, but Annihilus is slept on. Also, side note, for those of you wondering who the dragon was in this script,
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
I originally wanted to do Fin Fang Foom, but I don't think Fox has the rights. So let's just pick the closest thing from either the X-Men or Fantastic Four comics that we can use and call it a day. Sauron. It was Sauron. Overall, I think the Fantastic Four saga pitched in this video would be different enough from the other superhero projects to stand out, while still being true to Marvel's first family and familiar enough to draw in audiences. Which is pretty much what the studio wanted, I think. I mean, it's what I want, and really that's all that's important. And you know what else is important? Ending this video. That's all for this one. Like and subscribe because I've got more rewrites, fixes, and essays in the works. And speaking of, for my next rewrite,
This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government.
until then though, cheers.